Donald J. Trump has nominated hedge fund manager Scott Bessent to lead the U.S. Treasury Department. It's one of the most influential roles in government, with wide oversight of tax policy, public debt, international finance, and sanctions. Following a series of cabinet announcements and White House appointments late last night, Donald Trump's top team is almost complete ahead of his return to the presidency in January. Now, one of the things that's striking when you look across the names is how many of them come ready-made for TV, whether it be former Fox News anchors and contributors, or picks from the entertainment world like the TV doctor, or physician Dr. Oz, and WWE co-founder Linda McMahon. I'm joined now by Steve Herman, Voice of America's chief national correspondent and author of Behind the White House Curtain. Steve, hello.
Henry, hello.
Oh, we've got to talk here. Now, when you look at this lineup of TV pundits and populists and consider they'll soon be sitting around the most powerful table in the land, what do you think?
Well, we've heard a phrase from Donald Trump many, many times, which is a phrase of praise, obviously, straight from central casting. So as you pointed out, a lot of them are made for TV. They are people he is familiar with from Fox News. Some of them have been frequent visitors for having dinner with him at his Mar-a-Lago country club in Florida. Almost all of them have a track record of being what we would describe as Donald Trump loyalists and proponents of the Make America Great Again political philosophy.
And if you say that they've really been selected for how well they defend Trump on TV, as opposed to their actual expertise, what trouble may lie ahead?
Well, we've seen this in every cabinet from both presidential picks from Republican and Democratic parties in the past. Not every cabinet appointee gets confirmed. Most do these days, or they withdraw, as we saw the other day with the nominee for U.S. Attorney General. But there's always seems to be one or two that may flounder. But I think looking back on the first Trump administration, and I was in there covering that for a Voice of America, the cabinet members, to some degree, there was a perception among critics that they were just props. You know, they got together for the meetings, and we sometimes were in there for more than an hour, which is extraordinary. I don't think that's ever happened in any previous administration, where the press would just be in there listening to the president and then him going around the table and hearing words of praise for the president from the cabinet appointees. But those are the sort of scenes that he likes. But I think this time around, Donald Trump has been less pressured into picking more conventional people. What we've heard a lot is there's no guardrails this time. You might remember Rex Tillerson, who had been an oil company executive, who was appointed Secretary of State, and then he was fired by Trump. This time around, by contrast, we're getting Marco Rubio, who is an experienced senator, served on the Foreign Relations Committee, but also was among those who once opposed Trump. Marco Rubio ran for president 8 years ago and really got into it with Donald Trump. But in MAGA world, if you basically drop your opposition and give words of praise to Donald Trump, that tends to get you into the fold.
Right. But you say that Marco Rubio is an experienced operator. He's on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He's got a lot of experience there. But how much room for maneuver will he have on the international stage?
Well, that's a great question. And I think the Secretary of State's position is always a tricky one. I was a diplomatic correspondent for a while, and the Secretary of State there is meant to carry out the president's foreign policy. Some Secretary of States are more influential than others in helping to craft that. I think the best example in recent times is Henry Kissinger under Richard Nixon, where Henry Kissinger had a lot of runway. That has not been the case necessarily in some of the recent administrations. Marco Rubio is pretty much in sync with Donald Trump on a lot of the major issues. He's very pro-Israel. He's expressed some skepticism about unlimited support for Ukraine. He's very hard line when it comes to communist regimes, such as Cuba. His parents were from Cuba, and opposes the socialist government in Venezuela. So no great daylight at this point between Marco Rubio's position and Donald Trump's. The key will be when they get into negotiations and want to have treaties, agreements. Does Marco Rubio end up doing something that he's not totally comfortable with?
Yeah, not such a problem when it comes to Pete Hegseth, the nominee for Defense, the Fox News contributor, and Linda McMahon, best known for WWE at Education. They've got no experience in running departments, so perhaps they'll just serve at the pleasure of the president.
Well, Linda McMahon was the head of the Small Business Administration in the first Trump cabinet, so at least she's had a taste of government. And the mandate from President Trump and his supporters has been to abolish the Department of Education. So Linda McMahon is, I guess, supposed to pull the levers on the wrecking ball. Over at Defense, that is potentially, as we've seen from recent news reports, a more problematic confirmation because of some issues in Peter Hegseth's personal life. And as you mentioned, he does not have any experience. I mean, the Department of Defense, if it were a corporation or a country, would be one of the largest in the world. And usually you get somebody with some real heft, intellectual capacity, a real track record managing complex organizations in there, but not always. So that will be, if there is a confirmation hearing, if he does not withdraw from consideration, that will be a very, very interesting confirmation process. Not only will he be skewered by Democrats, but we can expect some tough questions from some of the Republican senators. They don't want to be seen necessarily as just a rubber stamp for Donald Trump. The role of the Senate is to consent and advise, and not surprisingly, a number of senators actually take that seriously.
Oh, indeed, and it's televised, and so it's a big chance to grandstand, isn't it, and to shine. Hey, and you mentioned, Steve, abolishing the education department. Just looking here at the budget, $68 billion, 4,400 employees. Linda McMahon is tasked with doing that. What does that look like? How do you abolish a whole department?
Well, it would take an act of Congress, and I would throw out a caveat on this, Henry. There have been a number of Republican presidents over the decades who have talked about abolishing the Department of Education since it was spun out from what was called health education and welfare. And the argument is that education should be something that's up to the states, the local school districts. But one thing that the Department of Education, that its proponents will tell you that is very, very valuable, it gives a lot of money for these programs such as Head Start to help disadvantaged children get an early education, and also for those programs that help the physically and mentally challenged. A lot of that money for their education comes from the U.S. Department of Education.
Right. And Stephen, a final thought, really. I mean, how soon will we be able to tell whether this made-for-TV team looks likely to succeed or whether it's going to go the way of Fire and Fury, the previous administration?
Well, that's a great question, Henry. The answer is I don't think we really know. You would expect even the most efficient administration with the most competent and experienced people to take some months to get up to speed, right? You got to, it takes a while even to find your way to the cafeteria in some of these federal buildings, and then to get a handle on the vast bureaucracy. And a lot of experienced administrators will tell you that when you come in, your first job is just to listen, to learn the lay of the land. But a number of these nominees would be coming into their departments with mandates to destroy the bureaucracy, or in the case of the education department, to dismantle it entirely. And in some of them, the president, I think, is expecting, President-elect Donald Trump, that he will have more direct control over policy of some of these departments where a lot of presidents are quite hands off.
Yeah, I do have one more thought, actually. We're how many weeks since the election? Just, a couple or so. Any sense that people are realizing the magnitude of the decision they've taken? I'm talking about the American people, and what it may mean for some of the policies, perhaps including so-called Obamacare, that they've grown to cherish.
Yeah, I think it may take a while to sink in with some voters, but you have to remember Trump supporters heard from Donald Trump for years about what he intended to do if he got back into government. And a large part of that was a disruption. So whether they have any issue with someone like Robert F. Kennedy coming in to oversee, the health policies of the United States, or Tulsi Gabbard directing intelligence. She has quite a controversial background. She's met with President Assad in Syria, for example.
Didn't Hillary Clinton once describe her as a Russian asset?
There has been that description of her. And again, she is one of these people that's going to have to be confirmed by the Senate. And that hearing, I assume, is going to be much watched television for across the political spectrum in this country.
All right. Steve, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Pleasure talking to you. That's Steve Herman, Voice of America's chief national correspondent and author of Behind the White House Curtain.